Well, hello and welcome to everybody. Welcome to Eastern Circle's discussion club, where we explore the past, the present, and the future of the post-Soviet region. As you may already know, this discussion season is especially devoted to energy diplomacy, and today's episode is on Russia, on its energy strategy between Europe and China. So my name is Gabriel Valli. I'm Vice President of Eastern Circles, and I would like to let you know that today's event will be structured as follows: a one-hour interview prepared by our team, followed by a Q&A session starting at 5 p.m. And last but not least, I will kindly ask you please to mute your microphone, and if you can, just to turn on your camera. Do not hesitate to write your question in the chat box. And now I will give the floor to Anastasia, who is the president of Eastern Circles.
Thank you, Gabriel. So we are very honored to welcome today Tatiana Mitrova, our honorable speaker. Thank you so much, Tatiana, for joining from Moscow. Tatiana is a professor and research director at the Energy Center Moscow School of Management Skolkovo, visiting professor at Sciences Po Paris, scientific advisor at the Energy Research Institute of the Russian Academy of Sciences, a research scholar at the Center of Global Energy Policy in Columbia University, Senior Research Fellow at the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies, Distinguished Research Fellow at Institute of Energy Economics in Japan, board member of Schlumberger and Novatek, and author of over 200 publications and 8 books. Thank you, Tatiana, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's really my honor and pleasure to be here with you today.
We have hoped to also welcome the second speaker, Mathieu Azano, the executive director of the SHIFT project, with whom we jointly organized this conference. However, Mathieu had to excuse himself at the very last moment because he's fell down with some virus and has very high fever, to the point that he cannot participate, unfortunately, in the conference. Of course, we understand this in the current environment. And hence, we're going to go to the questions with Tatiana, and you're going to have to handle them all.
I'll do my best.
We'll start maybe with the subject which you have covered in many of your articles brilliantly, the subject of sanctions. In the aftermath of 2014 sanctions, Russia has declared this pivot to Asia. And this was sealed at first by the signing of the gas supplies deal in May 2014, later expanded also to the construction of the now existing Power of Siberia pipeline between China and Russia. Of course, a very new kind of major step in the energy relationships between these two countries. Yet Russian natural gas volumes to Europe have increased in the same period, and new pipelines have been also constructed in the European direction, from Turk Stream to Nord Stream 2, and therefore and all the way up to the such amount of direct and indirect capacity through Turkey that even we can say that Ukraine can basically become almost a secondary or last resort kind of a transit country. How has the Russian energy strategy evolved in this last 8 years, between 2014 and today, between Europe and China? We saw this communication so vibrantly, so vividly. Gazprom front page had Chinese quotes in 2014 so much they wanted to show this pivot to Asia. And yet we see that Europe has not lost its place, and rather Russia has been consistent on its strategy to reinforce connections with Europe. How do you see this in terms of Russian strategic priorities between these two markets?
Thank you, Anastasia. A really good question, but I have to make, first of all, one clarification. Though in 2014, this loud discussion about pivot to Asia became really on the front pages, but actually the strategic decision was made long before that. So it was 2004. Actually, when Russia signed the agreement with China on ESPO, East Siberia Pacific Ocean Oil Pipeline, which is now actually bringing to China approximately 35% of total Russian oil exports. So initially, it was about diversification of the oil supplies. Then indeed, actually it was 2006 when Gazprom initiated negotiations on the gas pipeline. And that was very painful and long process, which ended up in 2014, indeed, right when the sanctions were imposed. So there was definitely this geopolitical component, which was used both by the Russian and by the European media in different ways. But for me, that frankly looks more as a secondary effect. The primary effect, the primary driver of this pivot, both for oil and for gas, was a very simple consideration that European market is maturing. It is actually starting to stabilize, if not to say stagnate, if not to say decline in the foreseeable future. And so it is really important for Russia, which wants to keep oil and gas exports as long as possible, to look for the other customers. And obviously, growing Chinese market, which is experiencing this energy hunger nonstop, was the first candidate. China is definitely not the most easy counterparty to negotiate. All the resources, both oil and gas resources in Eastern Siberia, they are basically greenfields in the middle of nowhere, with rather high capital investments required, both for the upstream development and for the pipeline construction. But at the same time, the potential of this market, at least for the next 20, 30 years, looks quite good to justify these investments. So that was, for me, the main reason why Russia started to move from west to east. And of course, then it was packed in all these geopolitical messaging. Right now, as I said, it's approximately 35 to 40% of all Russian oil exports, which goes to Asia. It's not only China, it's Asia Pacific. So it's Japan, Korea, and other customers. In terms of gas, the volumes are really tiny. So right now we are talking about 4 to 5 billion cubic meters. Compare that to the volumes sent to Europe. It's just a small fraction. But the capacity built, it actually allows Russia to increase Asia-oriented gas exports up to, let's say, 15, maybe 20% in the next 5-7 years. So it's more about diversification rather than shifting from one market to another. And as in any reasonable business strategy, you remember probably this BCG group matrix with cash cows and rising stars. Yeah, so European market in this respect, it is very profitable. And it is very well established, so it's a cash generator. While Asian market, it is just evolving. The trading mechanisms are just evolving. The pricing system is actually not yet completely structured. So it's a rising star, but with a good potential. So it looks quite reasonable to have both in the portfolio of an exporting country, which really relies so strongly on hydrocarbon export revenues as Russia does.
Thank you, Tatiana. For our second question about the European versus Chinese FDI market share, especially after sanctions, maybe the redistribution of this market, I turn to Gabriel.
So this is true that now we're going to move along the value chain. We've been talking about Russia exports to China and to Europe. And our second question is going to focus on foreign direct investment and how they have been impacted by the sanctions taken against Russia after 2014. How did the sanction have impacted expertise and investments going to Russia? Has Russia lost and been affected by this sanction? Has finally China replaced different Western partners in terms of direct investment in Russia? And Also, what about the experts who have been working with the country? Are they still coming from the West? Who is replacing them? And is China finally finding a new place in this game? So
yeah, and again, you know, thank you, Gabrielle, but I will take you back to the beginning of this century, because actually, though in our mind, this reduction in foreign direct investments in Russia, it is correlating with the sanctions, actually, it started well before that. It was, and it was quite a consistent strategy of the Russian authorities to actually reduce involvement of any foreign investors in the strategic energy sector. It was law of 2000 prepared in 2008 and approved in the beginning of 2009 on strategic investments, which actually has restricted any attempt of any foreign company to get control or any significant stake in any more or less visible oil or gas field, not even mentioning infrastructure in Russia. So that was 5 years before sanctions. And even before that, if you look at the history, if you look at the whole development of different alliances between Russian and international majors, Tinka and BP, Lukoil and Chevron, Gazprom and Shell, and the other attempts, actually they've all failed. So with a stronger or less stronger consequences, but that was not really such a massive movement. They were we can actually count all these large joint energy projects. So it's like Sakhalin 1, Sakhalin 2, Hariyaga, Yamal LNG. Well, in Kavikta, there was no direct investment. BP has actually stopped that. So they didn't come to the project execution. And basically, in this respect, it's difficult to say that in 2014 something has changed dramatically. So there were very limited foreign direct investments. Now they are going close to zero. There were these investments of Chinese companies in Novatek's Yamal LNG in 2014, 2016. Yamal LNG, now they've signed an agreement on similar participation in Arctic LNG too, but we are talking about shares of like 10, 20%. So it's not really a big stake in the project. And China is participating in Sibur's activities in gas processing, but it failed to get stake in Vancor. It has some stakes in Rosneft, but it is a shareholder position and not direct investments. And basically that's it. So I wouldn't say that European or broader speaking Western direct investments have reduced while Chinese have increased. It was a policy of the Russian authorities restricting actually any foreign direct investments except for very specific situations. And the reason for that seems to be quite simple. First of all, Russian oil and gas companies, they've managed already during the last 2 decades to accumulate enough cash to be actually self-sufficient. Yeah, so they do not need these investments badly. And they've also managed to get quite a good expertise in the project development and management, quite a good technological expertise. And the last thing that I wanted to say about sanctions, as we started the whole conversation with this topic, actually, despite many expectations, sanctions had very limited effect on the resilience and, let's say, stability of the Russian oil and gas industry. Some of the projects like tight oil, deep offshore projects, they were put on hold, but actually much more due to the changes in the market conjuncture, with the oil prices going down to $40 per barrel rather than technical inability. China has, to a certain extent, benefited from this development, because in some cases it is Chinese equipment which is replacing European or American equipment. But again, I wouldn't say that it's such a huge pie that Chinese are getting here.
However, this was exactly the follow-up question. If we look just at the value, at the industrial value chain, so to say, not so much anymore at the foreign direct investment, the sanctions targeted specifically deep water drilling, and that's the expertise usually had been provided by American and, let's say, French and engineering companies like Technip or Halliburton, and those have been, in fact, what you're saying, have been replaced by Chinese. Or did Russians manage to also develop their own expertise and become self-sufficient?
I would say that it's a combination. On one hand, reduction of all plans for offshore drilling and production for the market reasons. Some huge projects like Stockman were just cancelled. Yeah. On the other hand, it is some very limited participation of the Asian providers. I wouldn't say that China is that strong and competitive in the deep Arctic offshore drilling, yeah, to be frank. There was also rather significant effort on localization of the different technologies. I wouldn't say that it all was successful, but at least in some critical pieces that are right now important for the Russian companies, they've more or less succeeded. I'm not sure whether, the whole uncertainty in the oil and gas markets right now, it really doesn't give a direct answer to the question whether we should expect the next renaissance of these projects or whether their time is gone. But the technologies which are really necessary for the current operation of the Russian oil and gas producers, I would say that they've managed to localize most of them.
Thank you, Tatiana. I'm going to turn to Samuel Freriks, a researcher from Kazakhstan, with a question about how US-China relations impact Russia-China.
This is quite a funny story. I mean, it very much reminds me of the impact of relationship between China and Turkmenistan on Russia-Chinese relationship. So it's a game. Every time when Turkmenistan, for example, wants to obtain higher prices or has any dispute with China, Russia steps in, providing new opportunity for gas exports to China, proposing some new project, yeah, and vice versa. Similarly with the US. Each time during this quite long trade war, when China was like restricting US LNG supplies, yeah, immediately all these negotiations with Russia on extension of power of Siberia or any other joint projects, LNG supplies, gas processing, whatever, they were becoming visible in the media. I wouldn't say that it was a real change of the attitude. It was rather publicity, which was needed for the negotiation with the third party. So in this respect, I think that these games will go on. It's just geopolitics. They cannot stop it. But at the end of the day, it's much more about economics. about the costs of supply, about other economic drivers. For Chinese, it's very important to be engaged in the different projects development, supplying equipment, supplying, in some cases, even labor force, as they did with ESPO, for example. It's also about a control on security of supplies. So it is quite a complicated set of different factors which really define Chinese energy import policy. And basically we all, US, Russia, Turkmenistan, and many, Saudi Arabia, if we are talking about oil, and many other suppliers, we are competing to get a market share in this biggest energy market in the world.
Samuel, do you have any follow-up question to this?
No, she pretty much answered everything. Thanks.
And I know that you had another question on China and its COP26 and post-COP26 position. Would you like?
Yeah, I can definitely ask that. Give me a second here. My question is more concerning COP26, because a lot of the world economies have reiterated their commitment to reach carbon neutrality within the next few decades. Like the European Green Deal strategy envisioned a carbon-free EU by 2050. China pledged to reduce not only its coal consumption, but also its oil and gas imports, respectively, by 65 and 75%. What do you think Russia can do to prepare to respond to this energy transition decision, and what can it offer to the Chinese and European clients as a substitute for oil and gas?
Oh, Samuel, thank you. That's $1 billion question, not even $1 billion. Much more, $120 billion to be correct. This is the volume of Russian oil and gas exports. So indeed, Russia was quite ignorant, I would say, to the whole energy transition discussion up until recently. First of all, this climate skepticism, which was actually very strong in the Russian decision-making circles, but also this complete belief that oil and gas are there to stay forever. Yeah, they made Russian decision makers very reluctant in any climate discussion or decarbonization discussion. It is only the last few years, couple of years, I would even say, that this position started to shift. And during the last year, it was shifting very, very fast, amazingly fast, I would say. So during the last year, in May, President, for the first time, has asked the government to prepare a roadmap to lower carbon economy. That was like a small revolution. The government and Duma, they have adopted the first ever law on greenhouse gas emissions reduction. The state strategy of social economic development with a low level of greenhouse gas emissions was approved just in the I think it was November 1st, so very, very recent. And this strategy actually, it is strategy up until 2050, but it has also this message, which was announced personally by the president, that Russia is targeting to achieve net zero before 2060. So in this respect, actually, Russia is now playing in the same league as China, which has also announced net zero by 2060. The question is how exactly Russia is planning to reach this target. And here I'm afraid I cannot give you a really detailed answer, because it is work in progress. There are many working groups in the government looking now at different alternative scenarios of decarbonization. So whether to put bets on nuclear, where Russia is quite strong, or rather on coal to gas switching. or maybe enforcing faster renewables and hydrogen development in the country, or maybe to put the stakes on CCUS development and forestry. Of course, forestry is a very important part of the Russian decarbonization pathway, which is now only evolving. But the discussion is becoming really very serious. I see two reasons for such a dramatic change in the attitude. First of all, all this turbulence on the global energy markets, it has illustrated that actually this peak oil demand, at least in the core Russian markets in Asia, like Japan, Korea, and in Europe, it is not a myth, it is something that is already taking place. So this perspective of lower demand for fossil fuels, it is becoming like more realistic for the Russian authorities. And the second thing, which is probably not as crucial in terms of revenues, but psychologically it had much stronger effect, amazingly for me personally, it is European draft regulation on carbon border adjustment mechanism. Surprisingly, it has served as a wake-up call for the Russian authorities, which really started to work on this decarbonization agenda in a much more serious way. Because now the Green Deal, which includes CBAM, it actually will affect not only oil and gas exports, but basically all Russian exports, steel, metals, chemistry, whatever. And it is difficult to say how exactly this pathway of decarbonization will evolve. But I think it will be the question of the next couple of years when different power groups inside Russian Federation will try to promote their visions. Yeah, when some funding will be allocated for the development of the technologies, like in hydrogen, for example, yeah, just to see whether there is any business case potentially in the future for, let's say, massive hydrogen exports from Russia to Europe. It's really difficult to answer right now whether these green exports could replace revenues from the current hydrocarbon exports. So it's yet to be seen, but the work has definitely begun.
Thank you, Tatiana. Our next conference is going to be exactly on CBAM, because we did ask a question about, we are asking a question, how is it going to impact the industries, heavy industry in Russia, also in Ukraine, in Belarus, in Kazakhstan, potentially in the whole region, pretty much, as the European Union is looking to tax their importers for their CO2 emissions. To follow up on what you just said about hydrogen, maybe a question from Federica Prodan, our member and a researcher in Russia and sustainability alumna of the EU Institute for Security Studies. Federica, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. And thank you also to Professor Tatiana Mitrova for the interesting points raised. So my question would be, both the EU and Russia have introduced their hydrogen strategy. And we have leading French and German firms which have opened a hydrogen business units, subsidiaries. Some have even signed first framework agreements with relevant companies in Russia, such as Rosatom. So how can Russia position itself as a hydrogen player in the EU market, in particular in light of the EU hydrogen strategy? Thank you.
That's a great question, Frederica. Actually, I would love to know the answer myself. Yeah, because you are absolutely right. I mean, hydrogen became a hype topic in Russia. There are lots of hydrogen conferences, roundtables. There is this roadmap, there is this strategy, there is concept. So there is this hope and expectation that probably it will be new oil for the country. Yeah. But at the same time, and indeed many companies that have established their subsidiaries or departments developing hydrogen, so it's not only Rosatom, it's also Gazprom and many others. Actually, there are several dozens of energy companies, technology providers, and heavy industry companies which are now regarding different hydrogen projects. At the same time, to be frank, I have to admit that there is no single pilot project at the moment. So it is more of an expectation. Hopefully next year we will see more like physical progress in these discussions. The key problem is that none of them at the moment can see a clear business case with a clear profitability. So it could work as a pilot, it could work as an experiment, especially if we are talking about green hydrogen. Yeah, but building the whole supply chain from production with transportation and then sales in the European market, that's a big challenge because, to be frank again, there is no European hydrogen market. Yeah? We do not know the pricing. We do not have a clear contractual framework. These, at the moment, all the projects under discussion in Europe are also bilateral, very specific agreements with a huge state support and funding in many cases. Which do not represent commercial opportunities. And it's very difficult to overcome, to make this first step. Yeah, similarly, actually, to what the gas industry was experiencing like 70 years ago when the Groningen field was just, they were just preparing to develop it. So we are now talking about creation of the brand new industry, which is involving many different players and many new technologies, which actually have TRL, technology readiness level, of like 3 to 5. So huge R&D in the upfront investments and huge capex is required. And therefore, I mean, potentially, yeah, Russia has huge hydrogen potential, all colors, green, blue, turquoise, yellow or pink, whatever. Yeah, but whether this potential could be realized, whether this in a reasonable time frame, that's a big question mark. And it also, so first of all, it will depend on the ability of the European Union to create really attractive market conditions, to create a market, yeah, not just a set of subsidies for specific projects. But on the other hand, it will also depend, I believe, on the ability of the Russian companies to cooperate. Because I do not see any single company in the world which could be able to develop the whole hydrogen supply chain on its own. Yeah, that's requiring too much of investments and too much of expertise. Nobody has it. So both conditions are not guaranteed, to be frank. So therefore, chances are there, but no guarantees, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. A follow-up question I would have is about hydrogen as well. If this market were to develop, and of course this is a big if, because as you mentioned, there is no consumption market. Since there's no consumption, that production is basically for whom? Let's produce everybody hydrogen, for who is going to consume? So far, there are no hydrogen planes flying, very few hydrogen taxis around here in Paris. You can count them on the fingers of 2 hands. And of course, to say nothing of other uses, industrial or domestic uses, for example. But imagine that since there is it's a huge political drive, right? This is a policy-driven kind of market creation effort, let's say. But imagine that this policy and the incentives, economic incentives by governments on the European level, on the national level, that are created and that are able to drive even the whole neighborhood, Eurasian neighborhood, kind of within this direction, they work. And imagine that within 10, 15 years, we're going to see an industry coming of age. Now, in that configuration, there's been a lot of talk of reconfiguring current natural gas pipelines to supply hydrogen. So just to say, okay, this same system that has bound Europe and Russia for a very long time together through infrastructure is going to actually fit to continue doing the same. However, that also brings in a possibility of other actors who today, like for example, Ukraine, are energy transportation hubs, only transit hubs, just for the Russian gas, to actually become energy producers themselves, maybe potentially, let's say, huge change in Belarus, potentially Belarus as well, and thus rival Russia on this new market, the same way that Turkmenistan rivaled Russia on the natural gas market toward China. Do you see this happening? Could this be a prospect for Ukraine, for example?
Well, difficult to answer. You see, a hydrogen market, as we expect, we do not know for sure, but it seems to be potentially much more competitive than the hydrocarbon markets, because there are different sources of production. It's not limited only to the underground reserves, like with oil or gas, or coal, which can also be a resource for hydrogen production with CCUS, for example, but it's also renewables, so which depend rather on the geographical location, and access to the technologies and access to the capital. Yeah. So many countries which were not visible on the hydrocarbon market are now announcing their ambitions to become significant players in hydrogen, like Portugal or Chile, yeah, which were never seen on the oil and gas map. Yeah, so in this respect, theoretically, Ukraine also has some potential. Yeah, the question is whether all the conditions will be in place. So cheap funding, it requires low country risks. I'm not sure that we, at least right now, can assume that it's the case. Then in terms of renewables, Ukraine in its energy strategy has mentioned quite ambitious plans on solar, first of all, solar development, but I wouldn't say that they were really delivered so far. So I'm not sure that yellow/orange or pink hydrogen from the nuclear power plants would be really something that European customers would like to receive, either from Ukraine or from Russia. It concerns all post-Soviet space. And coal or natural gas, I mean, the reserves are quite limited. So I wouldn't exclude theoretically a scheme when, for example, some European consortium would build massive solar plants in the western part of Ukraine and produce hydrogen. But that will require quite a dramatic change of the whole regulatory and institutional framework in Ukraine, much lower country risk, transparency, no corruption, and I mean, very, very long list of things. And so it is one thing, yeah. The other thing refers to the transportation. So you've raised this question of utilizing existing gas infrastructure for the hydrogen supplies. I mean, if we are talking about Russian pipelines, yeah, the answer currently is very clear. Gazprom, which owns them officially by law, is absolutely strictly refusing to discuss these opportunities. Gazprom is really focusing on turquoise hydrogen, which is methane pyrolysis, And they are negotiating, they are proposing to the European counterparties to produce this turquoise hydrogen on their territory, so that Gazprom brings traditional methane to the European border, and then in Europe you can do whatever you want, producing both turquoise hydrogen and black carbon, which is also quite a useful material. And they argue that fragility of the metal and other technical restrictions are actually preventing from this conversion of the existing gas pipelines into hydrogen pipelines. I mean, there is a very hot discussion among technical specialists on this matter. And at the moment, I do not see any chance in the next, I don't know, decade or maybe even 2 decades to change the attitude of Gazprom and of the Russian government concerning this matter. So here we come also to the question mark for all Russian potential hydrogen producers, how the hell they will bring this hydrogen to the markets. So basically, this position of Gazprom, it also restricts potential for many other hydrogen projects, actually limiting them only to the coastal areas and to the maritime transportation.
Thank you very much, very clear. To get back to the existing markets and especially to the natural gas, right? So now we've talked about the future, now back to the present. And of course, the talk today everywhere, all over the news, all over the analytical world and energy is about the end of the Nord Stream 2 saga and how it's going to, when it's going to end rather, and how this is everyone's waiting for this. But the question, of course, then arises for Ukraine. Since with the launch of Nord Stream 2, pretty much all of the natural gas capacity, which is today passing through Ukraine still, which is around 55 billion cubic meters per year, can be replaced once that capacity is fully operational. And thus, the question is, how will the launch of Nord Stream 2 impact the role of Ukraine for Europe, for European energy security, and the exposure of Ukraine to Russian use of energy as a lever for political pressure, and will Kiev become less relevant for European security overall?
Well, it's very difficult for me to answer on the last part of this question, on the relevance of Ukraine as a state for the European energy security. But if I would rather focus on the first part of the question, indeed, currently, according to the existing contract, it is 45 billion cubic meters per annum until 2024. So the next couple of years, they are more or less guaranteed, and Gazprom anyway has to pay these transit fees. So it makes sense at least to utilize maybe not all, but significant part of these capacities. But later on, this is a discussion which is ongoing for the last, I don't know, 6 years or maybe even longer. Our analysis, I cannot say that it is like the last instance, yeah? But our analysis show that for Gazprom, it would make more sense to keep at least some volumes, some transit volumes through Ukraine at any case. Because it is providing for, first of all, for shorter and cheaper ways to supply some of these customers in Central and Eastern Europe and Moldova. And I mean, there are certain points, yeah. But also it is providing for the seasonal flexibility, which most of the gas experts assume will this volatility will rise Yeah, summer winter spikes and differential. So in this respect, having this additional room for maneuver, additional spare capacity potentially available through Ukraine, maybe not on the long term, but rather on the short term contractual basis, that makes a lot of technical sense for Gazprom. But indeed, the expectation is that the role of Ukrainian transit will further decrease. It has already decreased significantly since 2017, 2018, and that was a very predictable process. So yeah, it is ongoing, and I think, I mean, I would personally suggest rather to focus on how to make this process less painful and less and creating less conflicts potentially, because there could be some critical, really unpleasant situations which I believe everybody would prefer to avoid. Russia, Ukraine, European Union, everybody, we just not need it. Yeah, but the basic, the key trend for lower Ukrainian transit, frankly, when Nord Stream 2 is built, I think it's just inevitable now.
Thank you. Another question is going to be from Alexander Maledianka, lecturer and researcher from Belarus, and it's going to be about Belarus. Alexander, to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Mitrova. First of all, thank you for your interesting answers. I'm from Belarus, and I have some questions about Belarusian and Russian relationship. First of all, we see that Russia is changing its natural gas infrastructure and pipelines. And it's interesting to me, how would it change the role of Belarus for Europe, and how would it change the role of Russian-Belarusian relationship in energy market, in energy relationship? And the second question is about tax maneuver. We see that today Belarusian and Russian refineries are in different situations. While Russian budget will help Russian refineries, Belarusian budget didn't have such possibility. But how would it be increase pressure on Belarus because of tax maneuver? For example, maybe Russia is interested in Belarusian refineries. They are modernized, and would it change some Russian interests in this region and in Belarus in particular? Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. Well, first of all, I think we cannot actually predict how exactly this relationship will further develop, because at least in my understanding, all these issues related to oil and gas and refineries and etc., they are secondary. Yeah, the primary thing is geopolitical relationship between Russia and Belarus. And here we can actually admit that during the last couple of years, Belarus geopolitically became much more reliant on Russia. Yeah, so here, yeah, probably indeed Russia is increasing pressure in certain areas, but at the same time, Russia also needs Belarus badly. So it's like quite complicated bilateral dependency here. And therefore, the countries, their leadership will try to find some acceptable balance, at the same time always testing each other who will blink first. Yeah, so it's a game. Yeah, and this game, the way how exactly it will develop depends to a large extent on the market situation. Because when European demand and European prices go down, yeah, it is one, let's say, framework. When we see that potentially, or like today, yeah, very high demand and skyrocketing prices for hydrocarbons. This is an absolutely different game. Nobody knows actually how exactly the post-COVID recovery will go. Nobody knows how fast and successful energy transition in Europe will be in reality, not just in the declarations. Yeah, so many unknowns, but I think that anyway, Belarus is in much more secure and stable position in terms of transit country compared to Ukraine. There could be disputes, there could be misunderstandings, there could be even some conflicts, yeah. But basically, I do not think that Russia has such an intention to really reduce transit flows through Ukraine dramatically. It might happen accidentally if European demand goes down in a very fast way, but not as a policy. Yeah, with Ukraine, it's a different story. I hope that I've answered your question.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tatiana. With that, we're going to turn to our last question from the moderating panel, and that's going to be by Gabriel about the natural gas prices, just to follow up on what you started to say. Please, Gabriel, go ahead.
Yes, indeed. And actually, we hesitated. We also wanted it to be maybe our first question, because this is what Western media have been covering the last weeks. So our question is really about the key factors responsible for the current natural gas price hike in Europe. So what are the different reasons, drivers for this, for the fact that those prices have increased? Is Russia playing a role in that? And well, if yes, if no, how does Moscow use this situation to its advantage?
So first of all, I would like to say that it's not just a European phenomenon. If you look at the global gas prices, actually the spikes began in winter this year in Asia. So they had the highest prices in the end of January and February, even higher than in Europe now. And these were the first signs of this post-COVID recovery, economic recovery, high economic activity, accompanied by a very unfortunate coincidence of different factors around the world. If you have time, take a look at the recent IEA, International Energy Agency report on gas security. They've published it, I think, in mid-October, where they analyze all the different drivers, droughts and floodings, outages and accidents all over the world in different gas fields and LNG plants and so on and so forth. So all in all, we've ended up globally with a lower than expected supply of natural gas, both pipeline gas and LNG from all suppliers, and higher than expected demand for natural gas. Again, in all jurisdictions, in all countries, basically. So this balance, it has led, obviously, as in a normal market economy, to higher prices, but the system, the whole spot market, both in Asia, in Europe, it was not prepared for such a spike. And the governments are not prepared, consumers are not prepared, the underground storages are not filled in as they should be, and therefore we are now facing this extremely uncomfortable situation. And I would like to stress that this situation is uncomfortable not only for the consumers but also for the producers, because they see that it is already leading to the demand destruction. Consumers start to switch to coal. They start to switch in certain locations to fuel oil, yeah, which is much more expensive normally than natural gas, but In this situation, they have no choice. And that means that the whole image of natural gas as transitional fuel is being undermined. And that will definitely affect the future, let's say, interest of the consumers for longer term commitments on natural gas use. Yeah, but at the moment, this is the situation. And here, I mean, even if Russia would be able theoretically to add, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 billion cubic meters of natural gas to the market, it would not be able alone to rebalance the whole global market. Yeah, just to be very clear. So here I wouldn't regard it as a, you know, a specific blackmailing or bad intention from the Russian side to destabilize the European gas market. No. But at the same time, I wouldn't say that Russia's behavior as a supplier who was always claiming that it serves like guaranteeing supplier, or better to say, this swing producer of gas, yeah, that it was reliable enough to really give proper messages which could calm down the market. So I think to a certain extent it was used in this whole game around Nord Stream 2 commissioning. Yeah, so Russia could have made more clear promises on the potential supply volumes in November, December, once the Russian underground storages are filled in, which it didn't. Yeah, so here, without actually violating any contractual obligations or without any actions which could be regarded as unfriendly or illegal. Yeah, so I want to be clear here that behavior of Gazprom, it was absolutely according to all the rules, norms, and laws. But there was no goodwill expressed, and there was no friendly communication, which is also understandable. I mean, if you put yourself in the shoes of Gazprom looking at this whole saga with Nord Stream 2, yeah, probably you wouldn't regard your counterparties as friends to whom you want to express goodwill. Yeah, so here I'm afraid that when it comes to Russia, it is rather reflecting the overall growing tension between Russia and the EU and worsening communication. But funny enough, nobody blames US LNG producers, which are not coming to the rescue of the European market. No one is blaming Qatar, which is actually sending most of its cargoes now to Asia, not to Europe. So it's also not completely fair reflection of the situation. But yes, a relationship with Russia is not as good as it should be for a good development of the gas trade.
Thank you so much, Tatiana. These are really complete answers. I'm looking now toward our Q&A in the chat. I see that Thomas Zimovic had a follow-up question on that, just why Gazprom hasn't supplied. Is it unable or unwilling to send more gas to Europe?
I think both. Yeah, because it depends on the difference between short-term and mid-term. Just to remind you, last year the price of gas in the European market was actually below $2 per MMBtu. It was not even covering operational costs of the gas suppliers. That was a disaster for all gas producers, basically. And so this winter, winter 2020, 2021, in order to somehow reduce pressure, this gas bubble on the market, yeah, Gazprom has decreased its investments in production and focused on drying up storages both in Europe and in Russia. And that was quite a reasonable decision, I would say. If the market is flooded with gas, that's what you would most likely do. Yeah, not push additional gas to further drive prices below, I don't know, $1 per BTU. So Gazprom was quite successful in this strategy, and they've really dried everything up. And they used also, it was an opportunity to provide all the maintenance which was not made in 2020 due to the COVID restrictions. Yeah. And suddenly, in the beginning of the summer, demand both in Russia and in Europe started to grow. In Russia, demand grew by 5%. Nobody expected. And frankly, I do not understand even up until now what is standing behind such a demand growth. We didn't see demand growth in Russia for the last 8 years. So something is structurally changing in the economy. And I mean, all these COVID-initiated economic changes, they are really difficult to analyze without sufficient data. And European gas demand, it started to boom. But in order to fill in all these storages, again, you need months. You cannot do it overnight. And more importantly, in order to increase gas production, you need at least 2, 3, 4 months. You need to drill additional wells. You need to slowly increase pressure. You cannot just do it like this. And therefore, in August, there was also this massive accident in Urengoy. So Gazprom has lost capacity for several weeks. But in August, in September, when Europeans were already claiming like, please supply more gas, Gazprom was not able to do it just on this call. So I think December, January, this is a realistic timeline when Gazprom can increase this production. And it's not only Gazprom, it refers to all Russian gas producers. So everybody was actually, I mean, all oil and gas companies around the world have reduced their capex by 25–30% in 2020. Yeah, and that's the result.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you. This is super important to have the global picture as well, and to place Russia, take it away, so to say, from the hype of the newspapers and place it in the global context, since it is a global market. And indeed, as you pointed out, Qatar or the US, right, with the shipment of LNG, they choose the market where the prices are higher. That hence the choice of Asia, not for any other reason, really. I see Olena Pavlenko from Dixie Group, Ukraine, having a question. Olena, would you like to take a word and just ask it yourself?
Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry, please, it's a technical issues. Thank you very much, dear Tatiana, for your great presentation and for comments. Yeah, my question also is related to transit, surprisingly. I think that one of the decisions or one of the solutions for the EU to, let's say, increase competition on the market could be increasing of number of suppliers to the market. And in this case, the countries' suppliers from Central Asia could be helpful. But the main question is whether Russia is going to or can agree to be a transit country, yes, and provide its pipeline to be adjusted as a transit country. My question is, are there any scenarios which can make such reality possible, when Russia can agree to be a transit country?
Well, so far it has never agreed. As you remember, there were several attempts starting from the early 2000s to actually organize this transit. So in the end of 1990s, it was Itera, which was actually transiting gas from Turkmenistan to Ukraine. There was Kazakh gas also going to Europe and through Ukraine. Yeah, small volumes, but they were re-exported, better to say. But then Russia has actually stopped and blocked all these attempts. That was a period of rather high gas prices on one hand, making European market really attractive for the Central Asian producers. But it was also a period when they didn't have any other way to monetize their gas resources. They didn't have this outlet to Asia. So since then, things have changed. Now, most of the Central Asian gas is already committed legally according to the contracts to the Chinese customers. And actually, if you remember 2018, 2019, there were even disputes and rather tough negotiations between China and Turkmenistan when Turkmenistan was not able to deliver the volumes that it has promised to Chinese customers. As you know, Chinese involvement and influence in Central Asia, it is only increasing. So just physical presence, investments, and so on. So frankly, I do not think that there is so much gas potentially available for free for exports to Europe from Central Asia. Maybe we are talking about, I don't know, 5-7 billion cubic meters, which they can produce and which are not yet promised to the Chinese. And frankly, I do not think that it will make such a big sense for these countries to go into strong disputes with Russia, which will be inevitable if they will ask for transit. Yeah, we have this historical experience for these rather small volumes. So I think basically that the moment for the Central Asian transit to Europe is already the window of opportunity. It has already closed. This opportunity is lost. Maybe some opportunistic supplies, 1 BCM here, 1 BCM there, through some sophisticated schemes and arrangements which nobody can find later on. Maybe they will occur, but it is definitely not the source of supplies which could stabilize European gas security or something like that. Tiny incremental volumes which are not really changing the situation, nor for the Central Asia, nor for Europe, nor for Ukraine as potentially a transit country. So that's my impression, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Thank you, Tatiana. A question about then another country which has been a big winner from the Russian strategy of diversification away from Ukraine is Turkey, right? With Blue Stream, Turk Stream 2, it has gained a lot of leverage in Europe as an energy hub, not only for Russian gas, but also more recently for Azeri gas. And that's another possible, if ever, as you mentioned, Turkmenistan does find any spare capacity and agrees with Azerbaijan about transit, could be also Turkey could be that provide those pipelines which would transit it all the way to Europe. How do you see the reinforced position of Turkey as a European energy hub impact its relations with Europe and its vis-a-vis European Union and NATO?
So Turkey was already thinking about this role of gas roundabout for Europe since early 2000s, actually. That was the strategy. Initially, that was part of the strategy to become part of the EU, which then became not relevant, as we all know. But still, Turkey, which was at the same time increasing its own domestic gas demand in a very, very fast way, hoped to actually not only leverage from this transit position, but also to have benefits of multiple sources of natural gas supplies for its own domestic consumption. Since then, the whole development was very turbulent. So on one hand, it is not very clear what will happen with the European gas demand, whether it will be growing or whether it will stabilize or even decrease due to the Green Deal decisions. It was also very unclear, and still it is unclear, how exactly the Turkish gas demand, domestic gas demand, will behave, because there were spikes, there were periods of sudden significant reduction in the demand, and the whole Turkish energy strategy, frankly, for me, it doesn't look as a clear and consistent message. So I think that Turkey will definitely try to maximize all the benefits of the current investments and current projects which were already developed, and that, of course, both in relationship with Russia, in relationship with Azerbaijan, with the European Union, it will play this card. I'm really quite skeptical on the possibility for the Central Asian producers like Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan to get part in this pie. So Trans-Caspian pipeline, it became possible several years ago. I mean, legally they could have done it, but attractiveness of the European market, availability of finance for this project, and basically availability of desire of Azerbaijan to become transit country for their neighbors, they were not in place. So all in all, it's, you know, it's very much like this East European pipeline. Yeah, so everybody has been talking about it for ages. Yeah, but the puzzle doesn't get together, and therefore my feeling is that probably it might become one of these Nabucco type projects, which were on paper, on the front pages of the newspapers, but never became reality.
Thank you, Tatiana. Maybe just since we have a few minutes, there is one question to which you partially answered in the beginning as to the seriousness of the Russian politicians' take the green energy transition. But then Frederica Prodan, our member, had a follow-up question to this, which pretty much links this energy transition and a possible impact on the regime. Frederica, would you like to ask this question yourself, please?
Yes, sure. So you have mentioned that Russia is committed to net zero by 2060, that it has introduced some strategies, roadmaps. So my question is, how seriously do the Russian political and business elites take global warming and investment into the green transition? Is it just posturing, or is it the true change of tide? And if the energy transition is to happen in Russia, in your opinion, will it be detrimental to the current regime and its beneficiaries, so to say, or will all the players be active in the new energy mix? And I just give a hint, Rosatom's position in wind energy and hydrogen. And here I will mention a quote from a popular movie. Everything has to change, so nothing changes.
Well, great question. Thank you. Well, first of all, just to be clear on the motivation, 52% of Russian citizens, according to the public polls, are skeptical about climate change. So, I mean, it is on average, if you look at the people aged above 50, it will be much stronger. Most of Russian decision makers are still very, very skeptical concerning anthropogenic nature of the climate change. They've changed already their public rhetorics because it is becoming unacceptable globally, internationally, to express any doubts in the climate change. But basically, they still think, many of them at least, still think that it's rather propaganda to undermine Russia energy superpower, if you wish. Yeah, there are lots of conspiracy theories still very popular in Russia, and there is a very strong criticism regarding net zero movement and European Green Deal in particular. So therefore, answering your first question, I would rather regard all these statements and commitments as more as a forced action, just not to lag behind the whole world and not to self-isolate additionally due to this position on climate, and not to lose potential revenues due to that, by the way. At the same time, I do not see many enthusiasts at the moment. It is changing. It started to change. So more and more people, the deeper they go into this subject, the more they realize how it is indeed changing. Yeah, and it is indeed a threat for our kids. Gosh, what could we do? Yeah, so there is this process of educating people, including decision makers. Yeah, there is this process of information dissemination. So I think that probably in 5-10 years, the public attitude, the attitude of the authorities might change, but it will take time. It doesn't happen overnight. As for the way how this green transition will happen, well, look at what is happening already, and basically you will see the answer to your question. It is led by the state corporations. It is immediately falling under the control of the existing power groups. It is immediately resulting into the battle under the carpet between all these power groups. So I'm afraid the quote from this movie is quite relevant. And don't forget that in Russia, I mean, these pillars of the energy transition, it is decarbonization, digitalization, and decentralization, driven by climate concerns, energy security, technological development, yeah, and competitiveness. So in Russia, decarbonization is not yet that relevant topic for the society as a whole. Energy security, I mean, with abundant energy resources, you do not care about that. Competitiveness is provided again by cheap and abundant sources of energy. So the real driver for energy transition is technology. Russia doesn't want to lag behind, and therefore, for all the technologies of the green transition, there is already a clear requirement on localization. Yeah, we should have our own technologies in renewables, in hydrogen, and electricity storage everywhere. And there are state-controlled corporations like Rosatom, Rosnano, Roshydro. So all with Ros or Gazprom, yeah. So these titles, which are responsible for this technology development. So therefore, at the moment, I do not see any signs of the change in the competitive environment or bigger involvement of the international players or let's say more flat, less hierarchical structure of the industries. The system will be replicating itself.
Thank you so much. On that joyful note, the system will keep replicating itself. We're going to conclude. I thank you so much, Tatiana, for coming, for finding the time, for answering all the questions. It's really a pleasure to always to read you. Even more pleasure to see you and to hear you live with us. And thank you everybody for joining, for your great questions. And we looking forward to see you in December date. Please stay tuned for our next conference on the controlled border adjustment mechanism on the region. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a great night. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.